who was the son of a Tsarist artillery officer and whose grandfather was a Tsarist artillery officer who miraculously had escaped annihilation during Stalin's purge. And he was the one who had the intestinal fortitude and guts to stand up to Stalin in the spring of 1943 and insist that the Germans, the Russians or the Soviets, not attack the Germans. Some of your viewers may understand that there were several offensives in 42 and 43 in Russia against the Germans. One near Moscow, which was just a terrible disaster for the Soviets, and then one that came later with Stalingrad. And even though Stalingrad turns into a German disaster, it was never what people in the West thought it was. And the losses the Soviets took, some estimates are 1 million during the entire Stalingrad campaign. And this chief of the general staff understood this, and Stalin, much like Hitler, was always demanding attack. And anybody who refused to attack was essentially on his way to the wall to be shot. And this chief of staff stood up to Stalin and said, we can't do that. So Stalin brought in Zhukov and several other Russian general officers and said, what do you think? And they were scared to death, but they finally had the strength to say, we agree with the chief of staff. This is not the time for us to attack. We should go to the strategic defense and let the Germans attack us. And Stalin said to the chief of the Russian general staff, what makes you think the Germans will attack? And of course, the answer was, because I know the Germans. And offensive warfare is their trump card. That's where they win. Only this time they won't, because will be unable to maneuver. We will present an impregnable defense. Well, the rest is history. He was right. You got the Battle of Kursk. And the Germans broke off the battle. Some would say prematurely because they were winning it. You know, that's one school of thought. But the fact is that they did break it off. And what followed Kursk was a major offensive. And that offensive broke the southern flank of the Germans in Russia. And I think what you're going to see is something similar with Kursk, where the Ukrainians have expended themselves. They pull back to whatever defensive line they think they can man, which is not going to be very good. They won't have much left, and the Russians will simply roll right over them in great numbers. But again, what we've seen with the Russians is a deliberate approach that ensures that Russian ground forces do not move beyond that ISR strike complex range. In other words, in Vietnam, we had infantry on the ground that was always told you never move beyond the range of artillery. Well, today with the Russians, you have a similar phenomenon. Although this complex covers most of Ukraine, they're not going to move any faster than they have to and put at risk the connectivity that they have to this vast array of strike forces and their overhead surveillance. In other words, they're not going to walk into any traps. They're not going to march into anything where they could potentially lose soldiers unnecessarily. So while it will be a major offensive, it will be very deliberate. It will take weeks, but I predict that by the end of the summer, if not sooner, the war in Ukraine will be, for all intents and purposes, over. The Ukrainians will have been destroyed, crushed, and the only question is, what do we in the West do at that point?
Just popping back to March 1918, if you'll excuse me for so doing, of course, the strategic position was that the Germans were holding French and Belgian ground. And so the onus was on the Allies to attack the Axis forces all the time to clear them out of that land. And of course, the attacking force, certainly by the order of those days, is always, I don't think that it's changed since my day many years ago, of needing a 3-to-1 superiority in order to carry out a successful attack. So the attacking forces historically have always suffered greater, have they not, than the defending forces, in particular, of course, the Hindenburg Line, where they were dug in concrete bunkers. Okay, that might have produced a bunker mentality. Now, to get back to Bakhmut, it seems to me, yes, they've kept open to try and bleed the Ukrainians, which seems to me to be being very successful. That seems to me to be a successful situation. Perhaps you could just outline for a bit of, you have just touched on it there, an oldie like me is always looking at air power, superiority of air power, which we had, of course, in France, so on and so forth. Am I right in thinking now, in the modern way, is that you really don't need chaps in aeroplanes flying all over the place, or is that slightly passé?
Well, I think you're half right. Manned aircraft are on the downswing, if you will, because of the precision paradigm and the multitude of guided missiles and rockets and other forms of strike that can be launched from the ground or launched from the sea. However, in most cases, the Russians have been using these bombers to launch strikes with Kinshal missiles, for instance, actually launching them from over Russian territory into Ukraine. Now, some of these are what they call glide bombs. These are simply precision guided bombs. They've got kits on them. We started this a long time ago that allow you to take a 500-pound or larger bomb, put some wings on it, give it a precision guiding packet, and these you launch with great devastating effect against your enemy. These things have been launched in the hundreds, if not thousands, over the last few weeks, decimating Ukrainian defenses and storage areas. They've blown up thousands of tons of ammunition. This continues. And I think, yes, the manned aircraft, the age of dominance by the manned aircraft is probably over until such point in time that you can destroy the air defenses. Now, once you destroy the air defenses, then manned aircraft are liberated to operate pretty much wherever they want to go. That's also happened now. We now see close air support strikes coming in from the Russians against Ukrainian troop concentrations in southern Ukraine. I think we'll see more of that. But as long as you have modern air defenses, it's very, very difficult to use air power as we did in the past. So what I would not say that there is no use for manned aircraft. What I would simply say is that we're going to shift in a balance of investment, if you will. We will invest far, far more heavily in all of these precision munitions and rockets and missiles that are launched from the ground.